They're making billions of dollars off child abuse and need to pay for what they've done.
They've lied to parents. They, in some cases, told parents your kid is probably going to kill himself if you don't go through these procedures. So again, it's wrong. It's now criminal here in Florida, but we're going to hold these so-called medical organizations accountable for what they've done.
The American College of Pediatricians, which speaks out against surgeries and medications for children with gender dysphoria, applauds Uthmeyer. I'm Chris Woodward.
The Federal Reserve reduced its key interest rate for the third time in a row yesterday, but signaled it may leave rates unchanged in the coming months. More news available online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Almost 20 years ago, AFA took a stand against the war on Christmas. Tools like the Naughty or Nice list showed which companies banned employees from saying Merry Christmas, and the Christmas buttons? Need I say more? As the war grows into an all-out assault on the gospel, AFA keeps fighting back, and your financial gift helps. As our thanks this month, we'll send you a 10-pack of Christmas buttons to wear and share. Visit afa.net/Christmas2025 to give today.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Thursday, December 11th, and if you, like me, are on social media chronically and you see everything that is going on, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and mostly bad and ugly, quite frankly, there is something that Australia is doing about it. They have been in the works for a social media ban for children or for minors under the age of 18 to not allow them to use social media. So according to the BBC and some of the teens interviewed, they say that it's insulting to think that we can't handle it. But another expert, Jonathan Haidt, I think, I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name, who wrote several best-selling books, actually, about why parents need to rid their children of these devices. He says, according to the Herald Sun, expert declares Australia's social media ban is the most significant child protection measure ever. He said what Australia did is by far the biggest thing it has ever been done to protect children. It dwarfs everything else. We can mess around with making algorithms safer for 8-year-olds. We can mess around with content moderation, but none of that stuff is going to move the needle. Whatever the difficulties, and of course there will be difficulties in implementing this, it's a very bold law, but whatever the difficulties, imagine not doing it. He goes on to say, imagine that we condemn the rest of humanity. We condemn the kids who are infants today, and we condemn them to growing up scrolling and watching short videos and falling in love with AI companions and not living life in the world. If Australia didn't do this, or if Australia doesn't succeed and we stick with business as usual, I think the effect on humanity is incalculable, so it has to be done. So now other countries are considering a similar ban for minors. So let's welcome in Patrick Hedger, who is the Net Choice Director of Policy. And Patrick, you know, what side do you agree on? I mean, I think that that 16-year-olds and younger, of course, are going to suggest that they can handle it. They can, they love social media, obviously, which is maybe why adults need to step in and intervene.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. Adults, i.e. the parents, need to step in and intervene in these cases. We've got to be very, very careful about replacing parents with the state. And that's what Australia has done. And Australia, as we saw during the COVID pandemic, is one of the bigger nanny states that's out there. And I think it's really concerning to see this happening. But fortunately, in the United States, we, as the intro to your show laid out so nicely, we have inalienable rights that are protected by the Constitution here in the United States. And ultimately, people that are under 18 still have rights to access lawful and legal speech. And while there are plenty of things online that kids should be prevented from accessing by their parents and by parental controls. There are a lot of good things online as well, a lot of access to important communities, information. And if we expect young adults or if we expect teenagers to turn 18 and participate in society and vote, we shouldn't be depriving them of access to information about their communities, which is often happening now on social media services.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fair point. I mean, obviously, advocates, like this Dr. Haid, who is an advocate for getting kids just completely offline. He's talking about. I think one of his books, was talking about how it's just the chronically online generation. Really, he does need to be speaking more to the parents. Obviously, there is some content that if you're a minor under 18, there are laws and restrictions in place for things like, pornography or violence or, some other things. And so where should the line be drawn between what the state can prevent minors from accessing versus parental rights and discretion?
Yeah, I think we should err on parental rights as much as possible. In the U.S. right now, law reflects that the state can intervene and block minors from accessing or require age verification for content that is unlawful for minors to see. So pornography, to your example. But what we're talking about here is social media, and these social media sites do invest tremendous amounts of resources in combating pornography, using AI systems, for example, to identify it before anybody ever sees it when it gets uploaded. And so what I'm really concerned here with is the fact that if you are putting in place laws like this, companies like Meta and companies like Google and YouTube will comply, but other parts of the internet won't necessarily. And what you're doing is potentially driving kids when they are online away from services that are trying to keep a clean feed to places where they may be accessing worse content and maybe more exposed to bad actors online because they don't have any sort of footprint in Australia or whatever jurisdiction does this, and there's no recourse. And so that's something that really concerns me is the unintended effects of things like this. The idea that there is some sort of silver bullet to replace and solve for bad parenting is I think a foolish endeavor.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, it's always going to be more difficult for the government to step in and try to, have these types of regulations in replacement of good parenting. And yet, when we do see that there are so many teens, I mean, even here in the United States, there are so many examples of online bullying. There's so much content that that kids access anyways, even to the point of the content that is currently unaccessible for minors here. I mean, I don't personally think that I mean, data could tell me otherwise, but it doesn't seem to me that on websites, for example, that you have to be over 21, like if it's an alcohol purchase website or something, and you just enter your date of birth. Well, there's no real identification or verification that the user isn't just putting in something and they're actually under that age. And so what are the guardrails that the United States should adopt? Because I think that the issues that Australia at least portends to address, I mean, whether this is a pretext for being Big Brother and they're out to get everybody's identification and some of those very valid concerns, at least the idea of trying to protect children is a good thing overall. And so what are some steps that are still in line here in America with the constitutional protections of parental rights and also children's rights?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good way to frame it. What is in line with the Constitution here in the United States? And that is the government itself also has speech rights. The government must protect speech rights, but it has speech rights of its own. So the government can do a lot in terms of, this is either state or local governments or the federal government, in terms of promoting online safety information, perhaps having online safety curriculums in schools. We have sex education. We have driver's education in schools. There's no reason we shouldn't have online safety education as well. Kids are going to be online the rest of their lives. whether they get online at 16 or if they get online at 14 or at 18. They're going to be online the rest of their lives. That's where our economy is at this point. So we should be teaching kids not just how to avoid potentially harmful content, but also avoid scams and fraud and things like that. That is something that is well within the domain of U.S. law, and it is okay to do. It's more than okay to do. States should be doing that. And states like Florida have actually adopted social media safety curriculums. The state can also ban cell phones in schools. That, I think, is well within the rights of the state to be able to do. I remember growing up, my middle school was not in a great area. We weren't allowed to have backpacks, and there was no constitutional issue there. So certainly banning a smart device as well is fine. But ultimately, it's about empowering parents, teaching parents where the parental controls exist. They exist at every level of the Internet, whether that is your Internet service provider, your cellular carrier, your cable provider, the device itself, or the platform, which is the website, YouTube and Facebook. They all have parental controls. You can put those on at all levels. But ultimately, we should be empowering parents, because if you think about films, the rating system is a guide for parents. If a parent chooses to say, Saving Private Ryan is an appropriate film that I want to show my child, we're going to let parents do that. And I think we need to be preserving that in other types of media.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm speaking with Patrick Hedger, who is the Net Choice Director of Policy. And, really, if more parents were responsible, then, we wouldn't have as many of the issues that the state then thinks it has to come in and intervene and have, some of these guardrails. And, and to your point, I mean, I grew up in the era where in some of my law school classes, we couldn't have laptops because it was considered a distraction. And so you had to hand take notes. And I think that era has largely passed, but and of course we were adults at the time, but that was completely at the professor's discretion, and it wasn't a matter of anyone suggesting that was a violation of a constitutionally protected right. But with the growth of technology, especially artificial intelligence and some of these things that both parents and also school teachers, whether it's state-funded education, private, or even homeschool, there's going to be a growing concern, and there already is, with some of these tools like artificial intelligence, having children who are growing up in this era. I mean, they have to learn, in my opinion, they need to learn the good ways of using some of these tools, like ChatGPT, for example, but still learn the analysis, still learn how to determine what data is factual, not just Google search and believe the top headline. And so some of these things, when kids are younger, it's good for parents and teachers to teach them the appropriate uses and context of some of these tools. And so, what is the line there, in your opinion, in terms of some of the ways that even here in the U.S., a lot of public schools are looking at, banning AI. Some universities are looking at banning AI. Do you think we need to come up with maybe a different way of testing students, and even as up into university level?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it gets at a point that undercuts a lot of these one-size-fits-all laws, which is not all kids are the same. Not all kids learn the same way, and that's why it is so important to have engaged parents and engaged educators for every single child, and not assume that some sort of blanket ban for everybody under 16 is going to work for everybody. And when it comes to education, we're finding that AI tutoring systems can create a really unique experience for each individual that's using it, because it learns based off of the user. And so that's improving educational outcomes, where you have AI that's incorporated into helping kids learn those critical thinking skills, helping them learn those math and science skills. We certainly don't want AI to be replacing that, but we can use it to enhance that. And I also think it's unrealistic to say that we want to have an education system that is devoid of AI. What an education system is supposed to do, is get kids ready for the world that exists. And I can tell you, Fortune 500 enterprises are increasingly incorporating AI, and they need workers that know how to utilize AI. And so there is a balance there that needs to be struck, but that balance is not completely ripping AI and the these super valuable tools out of the system altogether. That would be like saying that, well, we need to take away Google search or we need to take away laptops themselves. I mean, these types of technologies have improved educational outcomes if they're used in the right way.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, not all kids who go through university are studying the same thing. I mean, what an engineer needs and the tools that an engineer would need to perform his or her job is going to look very different than a lawyer or a doctor or someone who's majoring in literature. I mean, there are a lot of different tools that are available. And to your point, I think it's more responsible to educate kids how to best utilize these tools and work within the framework of what's available instead of just a total outright ban. And I think that, like we used to have the old era of the calculators being banned in math class because teachers were saying you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket 24/7. Well, that proved to be false, and we all do now, and because our smartphone has all of those capabilities. So it's thinking about these issues more critically and ensuring that overall parental rights and children's rights are also protected. So Patrick Hedger, really appreciate your commentary this morning. You can follow Net Choice on X, and we will be right back with more.
Hello, this is Walker Wildman, CEO of AFA Action. I'm convinced this coming year will determine whether the movement back towards Christian values in our government will be sustained or will it fade? Which will it be? Who will prevail in the 2026 elections? Who will win the court battles? Who will advance godly values? You and other AFA Action supporters must play a part. This is why AFA Action has a supporter that has offered $200,000 to double the year-end gifts from faithful Christians like you. We need to impact Congress and state governments all around the country. We need to impact the courts. And lastly, we need to impact the 2026 midterm elections. As you've seen, the other side is playing for keeps. The woke radicals will spend and they will do virtually anything to destroy our Christian heritage and foundation, and they will succeed unless we stop them. To help double the impact of our challenge, go to afaaction.net, afaaction.net.
If you are 65 or older, you know this, inflation is hitting everyone hard right now, especially when it comes to healthcare. Over the last 10 years, healthcare costs have skyrocketed by, get this, 230%. If you have Medicare Parts A and B, you know there are still out-of-pocket expenses like deductibles and copayments, and they really add up. But here's some good news. MediShare 65 Plus is designed to fill in those gaps and help protect you from rising healthcare costs. At only $99 per month up to age 75, you get peace of mind at a price you can afford. And MediShare is trusted, too. It's been around 30 years. It's not some big impersonal thing. It's a community of people helping each other, business owners, pastors, retirees. People love it. MediShare 65 Plus just makes sense. To learn more, give them a call. They're great to talk to. They'll offer to pray with you each time you call, too. Call now. 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE. 833-45-BIBLE.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. The baby Jesus is no longer welcome inside City Hall in Kansas City, Missouri. Workers were told any decorations that celebrated the reason for the season would not be allowed. No religious symbols, no nativity scenes. City manager Mario Vasquez sent a memo saying the only decorations permitted would be those that celebrate the season without representing any specific faith tradition. Vasquez says City Hall is a place where everyone feels included during the holidays. Councilman Nathan Willett said he was disgusted and discouraged by the ban on Christmas decorations, but it turns out City Hall is okay with Kwanzaa decorations, which is a bit weird, seeing how Kwanzaa is a make-believe holiday. The city manager defended the policy, pointing out it was meant to be inclusive and welcoming. And by that, he means the only way to be inclusive is to ban the Christians. There's no room at City Hall for the baby Jesus. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, as conservatives are getting increasingly frustrated with a do-nothing Congress and concerned with the upcoming midterms that now President Trump has started to stump for, and even though he's not on the ballot, how is all of this going to shape out? Well, The gerrymandered maps could give the GOP a win in spite of what appears to be their total intention to lose. So coming from NPR, the Supreme Court lets Texas use gerrymandered map that could give the GOP 5 more House seats. So this is all about redistricting, and the Supreme Court has cleared the way for Texas to use a new congressional map that could help Republicans win 5 more U.S. House seats in the 2026 midterm election. The decision, released last Thursday, boosts the GOP's chances of preserving its slim majority in the House of Representatives amid an unprecedented gerrymandering fight launched, this is according to NPR, by President Trump, who has been pushing Texas and other GOP-led states to redraw their congressional districts to benefit Republicans. And of course, Republicans are pushing back on that and saying, well, the redistricting is simply redrawing the maps to reflect the voting electorate and not give an advantage to the Democrats. And clearly the Supreme Court is siding with them. But how is all of this going to shake down? Well, let's welcome in Orrin McIntyre, who is a host at The Blaze. And Orrin, it just, it's really hilarious to me that in spite of everything the GOP is doing to lose the midterms, it might be redistricting that saves them.
Yeah, obviously, you'd prefer that the wins that the GOP had secured, the legislation they had pushed through, all the incredible nominees that ultimately get assigned, those would all be the feathers in the cap that push the GOP forward. But of course, the one thing the GOP usually doesn't do is, luckily, the one thing that might save them this time, which is look for systemic advantages. It's great to win the argument, but you also need to make sure that you have a mechanical advantage in the operation of the election. And usually the GOP just sits on the sidelines when it comes to really fighting for those edges. So it is nice to see that ultimately, if the GOP can't end up with those additional seats just through the redistricting process, they're going to have hopefully enough to pull them through what otherwise might be lackluster achievements when it comes to the legislative affairs.
Yeah. And so, give us kind of the big picture, too, of how much could redistricting, because this isn't just Texas. I mean, here in Florida, Governor DeSantis is pushing for redistricting here. There are multiple states doing this. So how much could redistricting, if everything goes through as Republicans are planning, how could this realistically reshape the 2026 House landscape?
Well, like you said, Missouri also gets added in there, it looks like. And so there are several different areas in which Republicans are looking to gain multiple seats. And, of course, this is going to make everything much easier to push those majorities or at least maintain a slim majority if all of that goes through. Again, it's great to win on those arguments, but you really want to make sure that in many places, once you've kind of correctly assembled the district, once you've got the right percentages of voters, you're more or less guaranteed certain positions. And those automatic seats are really the ones you lean on in many cases. You don't want to have to win every single hotly contested seat. You don't want to have to pour millions of dollars into expensive media markets and races and put all of that effort. You want to be able to save that for those very specific, very intense and critical races. So the more automatic seats you can accrue through something like redistricting, the better. So not only are you picking up those seats that you can feel very confident in, you're also freeing up more energy, more money, more narrative, more resources for those hotly contested seats.
Yeah, and I'm speaking with Orrin McIntyre as a host at The Blaze. And do you expect redistricting to be a motivating issue for voters, or is this kind of just the inside baseball, the setup, and voters are actually looking at issues like, the Democrats are pushing this term affordability, which I want to get to, but they're looking at the economy, they're looking at border, they're looking at basically substantive issues, and redistricting is maybe just looked at as kind of the process of how we get to who's on the ballot.
Yeah, it's very much a how a sausage is made scenario. Most people understand at some level that redistricting matters. It's not that hard of a concept to grasp about how a district votes and how the proportions and the lines drawn end up massaging the demographics and other issues that are going to lead to outcomes. But as you say, most people ultimately don't want to think about politics in that terms. They're not looking very hard at exactly where the line was drawn with any given district. What they care about is the fact that they can't pay their mortgage and there are too many illegal immigrants in their area and their schools are overcrowded and it's difficult for them to get health care and they can't get car insurance. These are all things that people focus on far more at the end of the day once it comes around to the actual election season. So the media will talk about the evils of redistricting. Oh, no, the Republicans are racist. They're drawing these racist districts to eliminate minority representation. You're going to get all of those stories. The media will play up that aspect. But ultimately, I don't think any of that really translates to the average voter, at least not one that wasn't already going to vote Democrat in the first place. What they're looking at is what's the cost of eggs? What is the cost of gas? Can I buy a house? These are the things that they're actually caring about. What is crime like in my neighborhood?
Yeah, and so, when we turn to these substantive issues then, because I think you're right that, while redistricting is very important, obviously, for Republicans ahead of the midterms. I think Democrats think it's important because, if they're losing seats, obviously that's important to them. But, that's not really going to affect what the substantive issues that voters are focused on. And so how do you think that plays a part in this when Democrats have clearly chosen this term affordability as the message that they're largely overall running on? And Trump kind of, in some of his speeches has really kind of slammed that. And I think that he's rightly slamming what the Democrats are trying to do with that. But do you think that the Democrats' message overall, when you look at the economy and how frustrated, especially the younger voters are, that this message from the Democrats is going to resonate, or are the Republicans' pushback so far effective?
I think that they should take this seriously. I think Trump and the Republicans should take this Democrat push seriously. One of the reasons that Joe Biden was pushed out, or I guess, obviously Kamala Harris ends up not getting elected, is that the Biden administration really sat around and kind of mocked the idea that inflation and prices were out of control. Oh, what do you mean you need eggs and you need gallons of milk? That's fine as long as some other program is getting paid for. We don't really care. That was the attitude they had over and over again towards the American people, and it was not great. It was definitely one of the things that contributed to that loss. Trump came in on the idea, among other things, that he would be working on inflation, he would be working on wages, he'd be working on making things more affordable. Now, obviously, there's only so much you can do when you haven't been able to pass most of these things through Congress, and ultimately there haven't been that long in office to completely change the ship when it comes to monetary policy, inflation, everything else. But people don't care. They don't take those excuses. They look at their pocketbook. They look at what they can afford. They look at rising prices, and they say, this is a problem, and you're the president, and you're supposed to solve it, even if that doesn't make sense, even if Trump is still dealing with the after effects of the last administration. So I think that the GOP does need to take it seriously, not because Democrats have the right answers, but they are asking questions that I think the electorate is going to want to hear answered. And if the Trump administration doesn't deliver, they might decide to put someone else in charge.
Yeah, and this is where I think the Democrats have focused on affordability because they recognize that there is a lot of frustration with the current Republican Congress. And, they passed the one big beautiful bill, but, at least in terms of the economy, the average family isn't really feeling any sort of relief from inflation or from some of these high prices. I mean, every time I go to the store, everything is always a price increase. There are genuine concerns. And this gets into a conversation I was having yesterday as well, Orrin, that I'd like your take on, because some Republicans, or at least, the MAGA conservatives, are looking at Congress as just stalling Trump's agenda. And especially with this vote last night that 13 Republicans sided with Democrats to overturn one of Trump's executive orders and basically side with unions. This is just lending more evidence to the theory that the establishment Republicans are trying purposefully to just stall Trump's agenda or even overturn it, and perhaps lose the midterms intentionally so that Democrats can get back in. And obviously there would be an impeachment of Trump. It would be just a total circus for the last 2 years, and that would cause a crippling effect on the overall MAGA legacy and whoever Trump might seek to appoint as his heir apparent or his successor. And then Republicans could kind of get back to business as usual. And this kind of assumes that there's a grandiose plan, but at the same time, I think there's potentially some merit to that.
Yeah, no, I actually put a lot of stock in that theory. I think if we look at what has been happening in the GOP over the last few months, it's very clear that along with controversy and obviously the tragic death of Charlie Kirk and everything else that has gone into these discussions, it's very clear that there is a resurgent kind of establishment neoconservative wing of the party that sees, okay, Trump is in the second term. He's maybe heading towards a lame duck, Congress. Maybe now is the time for us to step in, cause all this divisiveness, and clean all those MAGA guys that have pushed this, these establishment figures out. Let's clean them out of the party and return back to power. We can see that it's not just in Congress. Different institutions like the Heritage Foundation and ISI are having, kind of mini coups inside those organizations, trying to remove Trump loyalists, MAGA loyalists inside of them. And then when we look what's happening with Congress, it becomes clear that if Trump doesn't get an agenda passed, if there isn't additional steps taken before Congress is lost, if it is lost, then ultimately you're going to have a scenario where many of the promises of MAGA cannot be fulfilled, and it would be very difficult for an heir like J.D. Vance to then come in on the momentum of a successful Trump second term, effectively killing the MAGA legacy and having everyone searching around for an answer. And I think the established Republicans will say, well, guess what? We've got an answer. Mitt Romney and John McCain. We're right back to where we started.
And it's just so infuriating. It's like they've learned nothing about the base, but I think, they just don't care to, because it's different than how they would run the party. And so what's the answer to that? I mean, obviously Trump only has so much authority as the president, but, we do have Speaker Mike Johnson. I mean, allegedly he's in power as the speaker and can try to whip people instead of just, as I've called him lately, just the kind of counselor and therapist of the Congress, as he seems to be acting. I mean, what are he and John Thune actually doing to try to get the Republican coalition together to, instead of focusing on themselves and their own power wishes, to actually accomplish things for the American people that put them there to begin with?
Well, at some point, if you want, you might have seen this, team before, the Harlem Globetrotters, right? Like they're this fake team that goes around and does basketball tricks, and they play this other team, the Washington Generals, who is designed to lose, right? That's all they do is lose to the Harlem Globetrotters. They only exist to make them look good. And if at some point you watch the Harlem Globetrotters win over and over and over and over again, then you have to assume eventually that the purpose of the Washington Generals is to lose. If the GOP loses over and over and over again and only seems to make the Democrats look good, then you have to ask, are these players actually playing to win? And I don't really understand how we can look at the congressional leadership of the Republican Party and pretend like they are ultimately there to win the game. It looks more like they are there just to make the Democrats look good, just there to stand in as fake opposition. I don't think that these gentlemen are actually leading the party towards any kind of real victory. I don't think that bothers them particularly. They know they're there for the game. They're there for the procedure. They're not there to take home victories for the American people. And that's a tough thing to look at as Republicans, but I don't know how we can watch what's going on in Congress and come to any other conclusion. Trump still has many nominees who are languishing, guys like Jeremy Carl, who are incredibly talented, would be incredible assets, and yet somehow are not being confirmed by a Republican Senate. If our own party won't confirm our own president's nominees this late into a presidency, what are we doing here?
Yeah. What are we doing, I think, is the question. And it's becoming more and more evident, especially through the months of the government shutdown when Republicans could have ended it at any time and they just simply chose not to. It is very apparent that they don't actually want to govern. They don't want to lead. They just want to be there for their own purposes. And yet people keep electing them again anyway. And do you think, in just the last minute we have with you, Orrin McIntyre, do you think that that's largely due just to how much money is put behind these types of people, lack of a good primary opponent, or, everybody's been talking for years and years that Lindsey Graham needs to be primaried, and, but there he is, and we could have 100 different other examples.
Yeah, it's really just a question of systemic advantage. If you look, everyone says they hate Congress, right? If you look, the approval ratings from Congress are regularly in the single digits. But the incumbency rate is usually 80 to 90%. And so it's just an insane difference where these people get elected over and over because the system is designed to perpetuate them, even though they are deeply unpopular for the American people.
Yeah, well, Orrin McIntyre, really appreciate it. And we need to be better as conservative leaders with hopefully addressing some of these issues. But we'll continue to talk more about this when we come right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildman and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
Do you feel like you don't fully grasp the true depth of issues like religious liberty, sanctity of human life, stewardship, or marriage and family? AFA Activate is a Bible-based course with 13 different professors leading 18 sessions that can help you become an active, knowledgeable world changer. Do it by yourself, with your family, or church small group, and right now you can get 50% off. But hurry, this offer ends December 12th. Visit activate.afa.net today.
What if healthcare could be more than bills and bureaucracy? What if it could reflect faith, foster community, and offer spiritual support? At Redeem HealthShare Ministry, the mission goes beyond medical bills. It's about honoring Christ and embracing healthcare that aligns with Christian values. Redeem members share medical expenses through monthly contributions, supporting one another in a Christ-centered community. It's not insurance, it's believers helping believers through financial support and prayer. And Redeem HealthShare provides freedom for members to select the doctors, hospitals, and treatments that are right for them. No networks, no restrictions, just faith-driven care. From everyday checkups to unexpected medical emergencies, Redeem offers flexible programs and encouragement rooted in Scripture. Because your healthcare should reflect your faith, not compromise it. More at redeemhealthshare.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. A vacation with a purpose. That's what we call our tours here at American Family Radio, American Family Association, because we go and we see and we do and we have great fellowship and fun and food, but we also have a purpose in visiting the places we go to. A spiritual purpose, a historical purpose, and that's going to include our tours in 2026. Here are the tours. We're going to Washington, D.C. We're going to George Washington's Mount Vernon. We're going to Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. We're going to Boston, Massachusetts. So if you want information on any of those tours for 2026, the dates, the prices, the itinerary, go to this website, wildmangroup.com. WILDMON group.com, and we hope to see you on one of our 2026 Spiritual Heritage Tours.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, as the GOP is figuring out their messaging and Democrats are focused on affordability and all of those things ahead of the 2026 midterms, there is still this push to redistrict in a lot of the red states and the push back. So there's still a lot of the legal cases yet to be determined and some back and forth. And now reporting by Scripps News, advocates say that they have enough signatures now to block Missouri's gerrymandering, at least for now. So the group behind a referendum to block the new pro-GOP map say they've garnered more than 300,000 signatures. So the advocates say the mere submission of those signatures is enough to halt the implementation of the new maps until voters weigh in on the issue, unless the Secretary of State determines that the petition process was improper or the signatures invalid. So let's welcome in Gerard Folletti. He's senior counsel for the Lawfare Project. So I'm sure Missouri's law is a little different perhaps than a few of the other states, but how is the petition process affecting what really is more of the legislature's province to redraw these districting maps?
That's a very interesting question, and the answer is we're not really sure because this will have to play out in the courts. Traditionally, in Missouri, there has been deference to petitions when they're filed with enough signatures to actually stop a law from going into effect or suspending a law that is in effect until voters vote on it in the next election cycle. But here we have the Secretary of State saying that the new map is going to go into effect regardless of the referendum. So we are actually going to see how the courts rule on that, whether the legislature has been acting properly in giving deference to these signatures or whether there needs to be a more formal electioneering process in order to get referendums accepted.
Interesting. So at least in some of my research, the state constitution of Missouri allows citizens to veto legislation via the petition if enough signatures are certified. But to your knowledge, has this really been challenged, or would this be looked at a little differently in terms of what's legislative purview versus citizens' input, or what are some of the arguments that we anticipate?
It's been challenged in the past and found to be a valid law, basically a valid provision of the state constitution. But the issue here isn't whether the referendum can take place. It's whether the legislation itself is stayed, it's not implemented, whether the redistricting is not implemented until that referendum takes place. And that's something that hasn't been challenged before. But it's been every time in every instance that there has been one of these referendums, the law has been put on hold until the referendum took place. But here we're actually going to see a challenge on whether the law does need to be put on hold, as the Missouri legislature has been doing, or whether it can go ahead and implement it and then make a final decision once the referendum is held.
Yeah, okay, that clarifies it for me at least. And so if the courts rule that the redistricting is put on hold until that referendum takes place, which is what Missouri Secretary of State is challenging. What would that mean then for the midterms? Would the referendum be placed on the ballot in 2026 and the redistricting then not take effect pending the outcome of the vote until 2028?
Correct. It would be in 2026, the referendum would be on the vote, but the people would be voting in the same districts that they voted in up until that point. So if the referendum fails and the law takes effect, then in 2028, we will have the new map. It'll just kick it down one more election cycle.
Well, and so what's the practical effect then for people running in these districts? I mean, for candidates, certainly if, effectively there are redrawn districts that would eliminate a seat or would add a seat, and, people are starting to campaign, put money into this, and so forth. And then there's a stop on the redistricting map. I mean, that seems like that would be difficult either way, because then pending the outcome of the judicial determination on whether or not there's a halt, people really don't know what candidates are running from where.
Well, that's right, and I think that's why we will see quick action by the courts, because if you're a candidate running, whether in an old district or a new one, you will be going into court very quickly seeking injunctive relief, seeking the courts to either block or approve the referendum, so you know with certainty whether you're investing time and money into a race. And whatever happens with the first court, it will be appealed and then appealed to the state Supreme Court, but I think that'll go fairly quickly because you do need that certainty going into the election cycle. Now, I think you'll also be guided by what the Supreme Court said in the Texas case last week, which is essentially giving deference to the state legislature when it's close to an election. Even though that's federal election law, I think you will see some deference to that in Missouri as well.
Yeah, and that would make sense. I mean, unlike some of the other more substantive provisions that the Missouri voters could try to challenge and, veto that legislation. Is the provision, to your knowledge, in the state constitution kind of all-encompassing that any act that is within the province of the legislature can be challenged by citizens that, can include even more of the procedural functioning like redistricting lines?
It is, but there is a difference between redistricting that's done in accordance with state law and redistricting that affects federal elections. Because, and we've seen this in the last few years as well with challenges to redistricting. It's courts look at it differently if it's just a state issue or if it's a federal issue. And it's going to be more difficult for state voters to say, to overrule a state constitution provision or vote on a state constitution provision that affects federal election law. So I think that's the other challenge here, is figuring out whether it's just a state issue or a federal one. I think the ultimate answer is, because you're looking at congressional redistricting, it's federal, and that law needs to be applied across the country uniformly, not affected by what a local variance might be in terms of petitions or rulemaking or objections to the Constitution in the state.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. Obviously, because this goes to this would also go to the Electoral College issue, and Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution is very clear that it's the legislature that determines the process by which electors are chosen, and so these are federal U.S. constitutional questions that are given specifically to the state legislature. And so, where should that deference be given? If it's the state legislature, which is then governed by the state constitution, should the legislature, as the entity that the U.S. Constitution provides that authority, have sole discretion, or is that authority effectively also then parlayed into the voters through the state constitution? I mean, how do you think that issue should ultimately be determined?
Well, it's also the additional question of whether state legislatures can do anything they want when it comes to federal election law. And I think there we've seen the answer to be no, that you do need some uniformity and consistency. So what I think will happen here is, and again, it's difficult to predict what courts will do, at least for until you get to the final stages of appeals. I think you'll see a carve-out saying that in Missouri you can have these referendums, but these referendums cannot be held on laws that are passed consistent with the Constitution on federal provisions. So I think that's the bigger difference here, that you're looking at not really the power of the referendum or whether that's constitutional or not under state law, but what topics the referendums can basically address.
Well, so how would that function then practically if we're talking about redistricting lines so it would be split between whether it's a state office versus a federal office, and they'll have to have two, completely separate maps for that?
I think that is what is ultimately going to happen. And you already do have that in a lot of states and cities. You see that, for example, for city council, you have districts that are different, or, they cut across the congressional lines. You have more districts often than the congressional ones when it comes to cities or states. So I think that when you're looking at a redistricting under city or state law, it will be treated differently versus one that affects congressional seats.
Yeah, and all of this is so fascinating, and it seems like, the clock is really rapidly running out of time for these challenges, but a lot of this, it seems like, especially ahead of 2026, Democrats and those kind of aligned groups are simply trying to halt or thwart the GOP maps at least ahead of 2026, kind of live to fight another day, and then, get a lot of this sorted out, and they hope, obviously, to their advantage before 2028. But what other states, if any, are in kind of a similar situation as Missouri? The Supreme Court is letting Texas go ahead with their maps. Are there any other states that we should anticipate having these types of challenges legally that Missouri is facing?
Oh, I think we have challenges that will come up in a lot of states. We've got redistricting that's been approved in North Carolina, Ohio, and Utah as well. The Utah map, by the way, favors the Democrats, not the Republicans. And we know that there are processes now taking place in Indiana, in Florida, Virginia, and I think even Indiana to hold redistricting. Some of these states are being done to favor Democrats. So all of these are likely to be challenged at some point. But I think the next challenge we see, whichever one makes it up to the Supreme Court, I think we will see a reinforcement of the Texas principle, which is that when you're looking at making changes very close to an election, there will be deference given to the legislature, and these challenges will be at least put on hold until after the next election.
Wow. And so looking at this then, if at least the vast majority of these redistricting are successful, at least in implementation for 2026. That could obviously change pending the outcome of some of this litigation. Where would that situate the GOP, at least in terms of the House? Because obviously, the Senate's not changing in terms of 2 per state, but where would that change in terms of the House of Representatives and also the Electoral College, which isn't up for anything until 2028, but at least theoretically that would be situated if this goes through?
On paper, the Electoral College would stay the same, and more or less the same in terms of states. You'd have a difference only after you have a reapportionment by census, which is not what these mid-election cycle redistricting is about. These are merely the parameters of the district, the size of the district, where the district encompasses. But on paper, this favors Republicans. In practice, as we saw the other night in Miami, we don't know whether Republicans will actually pull off wins even in these new districts.
Right. And so we're really with redistricting then, given all of that, really the entire focus then is just on the House.
Correct. It really is just on the House and on the House in 2026, because, again, this can be, now that we have these mid-cycle redistricting that's being pushed aggressively, we are likely to see this become a much more frequent phenomenon. So you may actually end up having redistricting every 4 years or every 2 years even in very aggressive states.
Wow, which just creates the lack of predictability. But, that's politics, I suppose. I mean, and everybody is always trying to vie for their procedural advantage. And, that happens even in legal cases as well, obviously, because, that those are the procedural before you even get to the merits. But overall, what is your view if you're adjudicating these cases on the authority for redistricting and the overall question of citizens' vetoes and citizens' initiatives and all of that? Because, I guess there's 2 kind of schools of thought here on the province of the legislature and the trustee sort of form of government versus true representatives. And if those representatives aren't doing the will of the people and they decide otherwise, they can basically step into the role of the legislature.
Well, the biggest veto that citizens have is the election itself and who they vote for, who they put into office. And it always comes back to that. It's you need to put people into office that you trust to represent you, even if you don't agree with everything that they say or do. And that's really what the change is now. We live in a society that is instant gratification for everything. You go online, click on something, and get an answer. You want your elected officials to act the same way, but they don't. So what's really going on is we're seeing a shift from we have elections every 2 years or every 4 years, and people get a chance to govern before being voted on. Now we have constant changes in politics, so there's no more government. Everything is people want instant gratification, which is why you see these recall petitions or you see these resolutions or you see these referendums coming into play. Ultimately, it's great to give people the thought that they have more power, but the real power is in who they vote for. Otherwise, you're just having a system where you're constantly electing and not actually governing.
Yeah, which then just kind of descends into the back and forth, and nobody is really governing and actually getting things done. And so with so much focus often on national politics, the national elections and things, I think that redistricting is an issue to highlight that we need to be paying attention what's going on in our individual states, because not only do state politics ultimately affect you, the individual, quite a bit, and we've seen that in the differences, obviously, between California versus Florida and Texas versus New York. Obviously, those states are run very, very differently, and the day-to-day is very different for the individual. But things like this, like if this is on the ballot in 2026 in Missouri, voters need to understand that and need to be prepared. And hopefully, there's a big turnout in the midterms. I mean, historically, Gerard, it's been frustrating for a lot of conservatives that the turnout is significantly less in an off-cycle presidential election when a lot of this stuff, it truly matters. It's not just the president that matters. Everything else on the ballot matters as well. So quick response from you.
President Trump did float the idea of having a convention next year, which in a mid-year, which is unprecedented, and that would be actually meaningful. I think it's important these days to highlight attention on these midterm elections, but especially on state issues, because who you vote for at the state level ultimately has a big play on who gets elected into federal office. So people need to be mindful of this, and they need that reminder.
Yeah, so well said. And I think I agree with you. That's a great idea to have a convention, kind of have sort of a national conference and attention to these types of things and highlight things that maybe the average person isn't paying attention to. So Gerard Folletti, really appreciate it. You can follow him on X. We're already out of time. So as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.